The challenge now is that you need to become much more relevant to your clients. You cannot just say, I know how to code software. Nobody is interested in that. It's too basic. The question is, can you help me build the software architecture for me as an auto company to be able to operate my electric vehicles and move towards autonomous mobility? Yeah. For that, you need to understand the industry beyond the technology. And that's what's exciting is you couple technology with a lot of business, because the discussion are about business. You're not talking anymore to the CIO. It's a business discussion. How do we create new revenue streams? How do I compete? How do I position myself? Behind, it's the application of technology, but with deep industry expertise. So we can talk about car. I mean, one of them, for example, is we have designed a complete electric vehicle for an auto manufacturer. You know, he wanted a certain cost. He defined the concept of what he wanted, and we completely designed not only the vehicle, but also the manufacturing plant that would be required to be able to deliver it at that cost. But the vehicle required a lot of understanding, of course, of how do you build a car and how a car operates. Because if not, there's no way you would be able to have built it. But at the same time, it requires a lot of digital, because it's an autonomous vehicle. So it's basically how it's going to interact with its environment, etc., and things like that. So we had also to put a lot of digital technology in it. Another example, today we are involved in helping to design all the manufacturing, digital manufacturing part of what would be a future gigafactory. And here again, if you don't really understand, the manufacturing as an industry and how you're going to manufacture and some of the processes, there is no way you're basically going to be able to develop some of what a smart gigafactory, how is it going to operate. If you sit in front of a client and you start talking about what he's looking for, if you don't understand his business, you don't understand how a car is manufactured, how a car operates, how can you understand how you're going to build a software architecture for how to operate his cars if you don't understand how it works? It's the same thing as we had in financial services around credit cards, payment systems, equities, and so on. You need to get into the depths of understanding of your client business, industries, processes, to really be able to develop technology that supports it. Listen, I think first thing, I think the pandemic has accelerated a trend, right? I think the pandemic has not started something new, but what the pandemic has done is accelerated some underlying trends, like move to cloud, recognizing that the cloud platform is absolutely required for your digital transformation, which has then accelerated basically the fact that we move to cloud. Like Satya said, we probably skipped 3-4 years in terms of basically that transition, in terms of acceleration. The same thing in terms of basically the trend of working from home, and the remote work. It was a trend that was coming bit by bit in the industry and in society at large. But you had a sudden acceleration because people being forced to be put in that situation and finding out that it's work. Well, it's going to have a longer lasting impact in terms of how these trends are going to change. So, for me, this acceleration coming out of the pandemic in terms of use of technology is accelerating as well the speed at which we need to change, because companies are becoming much more conscious. Banks that didn't have good digital setup suffered compared to the bank that had digital setup, because people not being able to go out from home still needed to interact with their bank and do a lot of things. So the fact that having to do a lot of things through digital channels, including, in a factory, people are not allowed to go from a country to another. How do you send an expert from one country to another to intervene in a factory? It was a challenge, which means digitally being able to be able to intervene in a factory in a digital way remotely to fix the problem or to identify a problem becomes critical. Things like digital twins become absolutely required to be able to do some of these things. So the pandemic has significantly accelerated a lot of underlying digital trends and use of technology. And this is, from my perspective, is creating really a technology boom. Now, it will the first consequence is there's going to be a lot more demand than there will be supply. I think we're going to have a supply shortage. Ashley can say in India, you probably see it, you probably hear about it. The demand is much higher than today than most companies are able to supply. So it's going to create a bit of strain in the market. I think over time, the capacity will end up by meeting, but I think probably in the next couple of years, we're going to have some shortages. The second thing, I talked about the fact that we talk about intelligent industry. Every product, every system, every operation is becoming intelligent. Well, an auto company wants to be able to develop the software architecture for its electric vehicles. So you start to seeing a lot of auto companies wanting to set up their own software factories. They're going to want to hire people. So the overall demand, from my perspective, around software and software engineering, so not just about applications, which is a traditional word of IT services, but now we're talking about intelligence into product and software engineering for products and services is going to explode, and we're going to hit a shortage cycle in the next 12 to 18 months in terms of availability for specific needs, not just for application like finance, HR, etc., but it's really around for cars, for planes, for smart grids in utilities. You're going to start hitting basically shortages in terms of capacity across the world. And to the perspective are positive, if you're able to manage, focus, being able to attract, retain people, and have really scalability in applications which are relevant to your clients, but it requires focus. It really requires focus. I think so. I do believe that we're going to have sustained demand for the coming years in terms of the leverage of technology in terms of transformation for many companies, and the need for technology is going to increase. Now, we have to realize all this is not externalized. That means companies themselves are also going to build a lot more capabilities than what they have today. So I think it will be, some of it is coming through services because the speed at which things are going and the capacity required, we are much more geared in terms of our ability to hire, train, and deploy resources, around technology usage than many of our clients who have much smaller pool of resources in these areas. So the demand for services will continue to increase, but I think as well, we'll see a lot of companies, building their own capabilities. I have seen a number of CEOs, that will visit to Google or somebody else and said, this is what I want to become. I want my company to become an engineering company. And we're talking about financial services executives, right? So that's how people think about it. People are realizing that they need to be able to really ramp up their own technology skills in the company for CXOs and CEOs and CXOs across the company to really become much more attuned to technologies, use of technology, its potential impacts is growing significantly, and themselves will be acquiring and building a lot more technical capabilities and technology capabilities than they had in the past. Talk about India, because you asked me about India and the evolution of India and the role of India. And as we are, I believe in Capgemini, we did that experience a bit differently than other Western companies. I cannot talk about the Indian firm because the Indian firm grew from India. It is true. I'll give you an anecdote. When I did in 2005, I was part of group strategy and I was sent to the US to design our booster program. At the time, it was post ENY acquisition. The US was a real mess. It was melting down. We were losing money, etc. and things like that. It was really 2004 was the low point for Capgemini. I think we lost money in H1 2004, which was the only time in our history that we lost money. And I was sent to the US to design the transformation program for North America, which was part of my consulting skills, I'd acquired in the previous decade. And as I looked at that, I saw how India was being used by the US. So right after designing that program for the US, I went to India. We had 2,500 people at the time. And I went there to do what was called India 10,000. How do we take India from 2,500 to 10,000 people? Ashwin was there. He was part of the program. He was on one of the streams of the program, basically helping to design that. And from that time, within 2 years, we did the Cambay acquisition, and we saw the one team model of Cambay and how it worked, the collaborative way. So the way we grew India is quite differently from my perspective than the way many other Western firms. So India never grew up as a backbone of delivery for Capgemini. It wasn't the back office just to be able to win the projects and reduce cost. I think from the inception, India has become an internal part of Capgemini. Very quickly we had Indian executive as part of our senior team. It wasn't something that came very late into the process. And we have grown India as being really an integral part of Capgemini. The one team, kind of model that we inherited from Cambay became pervasive everywhere. And people work in a very collaborative way. I can tell you, of course, in Europe at the beginning it was challenging. German engineers considering that in India some people could do as good a work as them was very tough at the beginning for them to accept. Okay? But over time, we have changed that. And India went from delivery to really becoming fully integral part of our knowledge management, creative. For example, when I was head of financial services, we used to produce all this Word retail banking report, Word insurance report, etc. I moved all that to India because I consider we could build the skills to be able to start doing all that knowledge creation, etc. From India. And then we started creating our centers of excellence in India. And for me, what I call India today, I don't call it a global delivery center, I call it a global business platform, right? Because we manage clients, we develop, we do innovation. A lot of new things, we actually do them in India because we can create a core team with good skills to really start something new before we start deploying everywhere else in the world. So for me, India has become really a fundamental part of the group. A lot of things are happening in India. It's not just about delivery. It's about innovation. It's about sector knowledge. It's about account management and account support. And we have a lot of, platforms, if you want, like people call them today. We have a lot of platforms in India that are basically supporting very critical components of the group. So, I think over time we'll have more and more Indian senior leadership as part of the senior leadership of the group. Listen, I think there's a question of culture, right? Capgemini, since its inception more than 50 years ago, has grown through acquisitions. We went into Netherlands with an acquisition. We went into the UK with an acquisition. We went into Germany with an acquisition. So Capgemini itself has always grown through acquisitions. And it has created a pretty open culture. So there is a lot of, there are 7 common values in Capgemini. People operate with something in mind and all aligned in terms of a final goal. However, leadership styles are quite different. You don't have a monolithic leadership style in Capgemini. All the managers, we're not a company where we're going to have the French dominating and basically managing everything everywhere. In most countries, we only have local management, which tend to be a bit different. Part of the challenge sometimes with Capgemini is that things are different sometimes when you go from country to country. But it's also part of the strength. Part of the strength because it's an open culture and we are able to integrate a lot of people coming from different places with different leadership styles and what I call create a space for them to exist. Okay? Capgemini is not a command and control firm. You don't make decisions and everybody implements, which sometimes is a challenge. So in terms of execution, sometimes it can take more time. But because you have a lot more independent managers that can act on their own and make decisions. Part of our strength in the pandemic is People did not wait for the central command to tell them what to do. They were already acting, changing, adapting, doing things. They didn't wait for anybody to give them instruction. So that open culture, that space to exist, enables us to absorb companies and for people to say, oh, finally I can exist here, I can continue to thrive, I can be a bit different from everybody else, and it's okay. And that's what enables you to be able to acquire, because in our business we are acquiring talent. We're not buying assets. If you buy a company and 50% of people leave after 1 year, you have nothing left.
Yeah.
Maybe you still have some client relationships left, but you lost of what you paid for. And so the big challenge on acquisition is how do you keep the talent? And we are very sensitive to that. Some people go, for example, I'll give you something, and I have done, in my previous consulting life as part of Capgemini and Gemini Consulting, and now for many years, a lot of big acquisition and small acquisition in Capgemini and integrated companies in Capgemini. I'll give you an example. The titles, right? People rush because they want to harmonize how people are called, what's a senior consultant, etc. It's the last thing to touch. It's the most sensitive area. You have to take time, and whenever you can, create new areas, new titles, new things so people feel. Because you tell me I was X before, now you call me a senior consultant, but then I compare it, but I don't feel I'm the same level as this guy, etc. And then people leave. So there's plenty of sensitive things that you have to be very attuned to and be very careful about if you want to make a good integration. And we acquire companies. What we try to avoid is what I call the bidding processes. Okay? When people are for sale and there's 5 companies bidding and the bigger bidder wins the price, it's usually a pretty bad setup because you're acquiring people who are coming to you because you paid the highest price. Okay? We usually acquire companies on one-to-one, and part of it is, does the team and the management team want to join Capgemini? What are the cultural differences with this company? Is this going to work, right? Can we keep the people? Do we know how to motivate them? And if the answer is no, say, run away. Run away. Yeah, I can talk. I mean, listen, high points, I don't know. I mean, it's the high point is always when you're put in situations and you wonder if you're really going to be able to make it. I'll give you an example. When I became CFO, I have no finance background.
Uh-huh.
I'm good with numbers, but I have no finance background. I've done finance in business school, but that was the limit of my financial experience. And I was put in a process as part of CFOs. Paul Hermelin, the CEO at the time, basically thought it was a good idea to try to put an operational guy as part of the panel of people to look at internally and externally for as a CFO. And I ended up at the end of this process becoming the CFO. And I was like, I said, Paul, it's not you're kidding. He said, no. The board, everybody's convinced that you'll be the right next CFO for the group. And I think it was 12th of December or something like that. I landed as CFO. Nicolas Dufour, the previous CFO, had left in October, right? I arrived, and Paul told me, okay, now you're going to have to close the books for the year and help me and prepare the financial communication and help me to that we define the guidance for next year. And I said, what? And when you put in a situation like that and you say, okay, how am I going to survive and for how long? Is it going to be a matter of weeks before I get fired? And at the end of the day, you make it, but then you say, okay, you know what? Ability of humanity to adapt to circumstances can be pretty daunting sometimes. So the high point for me, is I was able to come into the CFO role. I think overall I ended up doing a pretty good job, bringing what I knew how to do and really knowing how to leverage very well the people around me. Was a very good team for what I didn't know, right? And I took it as a leadership role versus I need to understand everything about finance. And we can say low point if you want. You know, I became the CEO of our global financial services business on the 1st of January 2009. You know, so I went in initially into that business after the acquisition of Cambay. After I did the post-merger integration, and I became the CEO of that new financial services business that we had created, our first global vertical P&L, in I think September 2007. 15 months later, the CEO of Cambay, you know, left, and Paul told me, okay, you're going to run financial services globally. 1st of January 2009, everything went to hell, you know. The top line started coming down, and months after months after months after months, you know, things were crashing, and you know, and the CEO like Paul say, okay, did you make the right decision about putting this guy in this job? Basically, have you made a mistake in terms of casting? So in a certain way, you can say it's a low point because I was there. I was just put in the first very large P&L role, and suddenly everything, you know, was crashing around me. But here, to be frank, and what was strong is the strength of the team around me. Is basically the cohesion of the team in financial services. Their support for me is really what gave me a few months. Because Paul told me at the time, he told me I was impressed when we did that meeting about how cohesive the team around you and how they were behind you in terms of fully trusting that you're making the right decisions, you know. And that, at the end of the day, 6 months later, you know, things were going up in a very good way, and we were very successful for several years after that. So it's a low point because it's, you know, you wonder basically if you're going to make it out of it.
Mm.